Welcome back to Primary Source China Investment. We're on show V3. Peng.guo and I are here. We've got a lot to get through, so let's kick it off. We've spent a number of shows talking about this concept of dual circulation. And what that is a program that initially sought to increase technological innovation domestically in China and thereby decreasing the dependency on the West. And then taking that homegrown innovation and expanding that outwards. So Xi Jinping introduced this policy more than 2 years ago, and there's been some tweaking. Now the sectors are not just tech, but energy, food, and finance, which means China wants to become more and more self-reliant. So maybe that dual circulation is like a singular circulation. But first, let's look at the returns. So we have some data about that. And in the US, there's an ETF that trades mainland less SOEs, state-owned enterprises. So, and they define that by having a state-owned enterprise own more than 20%. So that ETF is CXSE, and we can compare that to ASHR. We don't have 2 years of history for CXSE, but we do have a 1-year chart. And over that 1 year, CXSE has lagged ASHR by 10%. The reason is a lot of the non-SOE is tech, just like KWeb. So those tech companies are not SOE tech companies. The thesis here now is going forward, energy, food, and finance related businesses should all outperform. So what do you think of that thesis, Peng.guo?
So firstly, we see the risk. So I think in China, the country level risk is the major risk need concerned. The dual circulation is not China willing to choose this way. So they have no other choice. They have to do it like this way to get a survive.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like other countries are stopping tech from going in, and there's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of the sections from the United States.
Yeah.
So if they give the option to buy it, I bet China would be happy to buy it rather than do it by himself.
Yeah.
It's always like this way. Obviously, global recessions comes. So many industries get impacted. In this kind of situation, state-owned companies get much better advantages than private companies. So in China, generally speaking, a lot of the social infrastructure and the service provided still by the state-owned companies,
right?
Almost in any area. So and a lot of the entrepreneur, you can see from their background, knowledge structure, and some of the things, they cannot afford long-term manage big companies very well. That will already get approved in China for many. You will also see a lot of history stories about it. So that is why people still choose, especially in the depression or recession period, state-owned companies get a much better performance than the private company.
That's a great point. So we actually brought up the financials last week, and I wanted to bring those up again because all of these are large SOEs. And if you look at what's their valuation, what's their, what do they look at as an investment perspective, they look pretty good, right? If you look at the top 5 names in market cap, the peng.guo, the China Merchants, Industrial Bank, and I'm leaving out East Money because that's really a tech firm, walking around as a financial services firm. And then CITIC rounds out the top 5. They have an average PE of 7 and a dividend yield of 5. So if you're going to hide out, like we said last week, you'd probably want to hide out in financials.
That's true. So I think overall, this state-owned company, they have advantage. My concern is that they are just too profitable and squeeze out the profit of other private companies.
Yeah, that's a whole problem.
I personally think that is probably a problem.
Well, this brings up a great segue to our next sector, which is energy, because we've talked a lot about new energy, clean energy as a nice investment theme in China. It's been a priority for Beijing. So clearly that's an area to invest. However, on the other side, part of this dual circulation is to become energy independent. Beijing doesn't want to see what's happening in Europe happen on the mainland. So they're going to invest a lot in infrastructure. And a lot of those large energy companies are large SOEs. And if you look at the energy index, it's dominated by heavy industry, electric providers, coal users, oil companies, and oil refineries. And that sector was up 35% year to date. Contrast that to the clean energy basket, which was down 20% year to date. So even after a 35% rise this year for that, we'll call it the old energy or the biggest energy pockets, the top 5 traded a 7.8 PE and a 6.66% dividend yield, which is that PE is less than half of the CSI 300. And that clean basket, like we said, with the green energy and the solar, that's been a very hype trend, and that's down 20% year to date. So what do we do going forward?
In the long term, entire the energy sector still dominated by the state-owned companies. Think about it, they always have largest distribution channel and clients. So no matter what kind of the new energy or private company, new technology, you have to access to the distribution channel and use their service.
It's this way in most countries, right? I mean, even in the US, you have regional energy players, Con Edison up here, and down south you have Duke Energy and Florida Power and Light, and a lot of these entities become quasi-monopolies in their region, so they tend to be good value plays. They pay a good dividend, those kind of things. Whereas a lot of the new energy is a lot of new entrepreneurs. The difference is in China, a lot of these big SOE names, they also get preferential rates from the banks. So they are able to compete even better. Maybe, it's oxymoronic, right? They're actually more efficient than some of the private firms because private firms have to go get private money. Although there is policy that's driving a lot of this clean energy investment.
Because this is really like the industry chain.
Yeah.
So like the bigger state-owned companies, they still take some positions. I think many of them take positions to the client side because they already provide the service to the individual client or whatever client for a long term. But for the upstream, like the mining or like the refining, there's many areas, probably they don't have the incentive to do it, or maybe they are not have a competitive advantage for the emerging private companies. So those areas still could get a huge profit as well.
But it's hard to get into those
quickly.
A lot of that sector is closed off. You just can't start a new oil exploration company in China.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's going to be that's going to be
still like the service, digital, like a digital transformation, a lot of things and the connection with the different industry. So that is really like the broken boundary of the sectors. So people get connected. Like the bigger oil company, they still sell the coffee in their gas station. They become the largest coffee supplier in the market.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of coffee, the last area where this dual circulation has been reinforced is in the food sector, agricultural sector. A lot of that is commodity driven, but there are some companies in that food sector as well. Some of them have to do with a specific product, like pork or milk. Those are the kind of names we're going to be looking at going forward as to where the policy is going to be driven. Because if China has a long history of being wanting to be food independent, and we don't need to rehash that history, but that's definitely a priority out of Beijing, is to make sure that there's ample
I think
food
people
supply.
maybe don't worry too much about the policy. People is always get greedy. They want this, want that, and they always want something good. But finally, you will realize the policy get a conflict each other. So you cannot reach all the goals at the same time. And sooner or later, you have to always trade off for something.
Right.
Otherwise, every country will get rich pretty soon.
Yeah, I think before we end, I want to reinforce the point you made earlier. In times where there's some tightening, there's maybe some recession, there's some downtrend, those SOEs are going to outperform. And it looks like we're in a period like that. So look for low PE, look for dividend yield, and that's probably going to be the safe bet. And we'll be watching it going forward.
That's true. Yeah, that's a sector rotation. You have to make it good at that.
Absolutely. We're going to leave it there for show V3. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.